Okay, so this is going to be our discussion of the 2025 Aries Ingress, which, fun fact, does not begin at these Aries Ingress. We're going to be primarily using sources that draw from astrologers like Ptolemy, who was an inspiration of sorts for more Persian astrologers who got really into mundane or world astrology. Particularly, the one I'm working with right now is going to be Masha Allah. So, a lot of my criteria that I will be going from to show you in these charts will be drawn from Masha Allah's general idea of what this means in the chart. And I'll explain a lot of it to you. If you know house systems and stuff, we're just taking natal astrology and saying, if this personal thing applied to everybody, what would it be? And that's really a good rule of thumb for thinking about mundane astrology or world astrology. A lot of the times the text will say, just as you would for a natal chart, we're going to do this. And so we can get into that as well. So I will be showing several charts, starting with where we really begin, which is the pre-ingress lunation. The moon before the Aries ingress sets a tone for the year. And if you've been seeing on social media that this is going to be a big year of change, they're talking about outer planet transits. We're not even really going to get into those today, although I do have a document that shows you outer planet transits and what dates that they happen. It's the free download on my website. However, it is going to be a year of change, not just with those outer planet transits that add to this context, but even in the ancient astrology, which had no idea those outer planets even existed, we see a lot of indications of change and some indications of intensity. Now, I promise in everything that I do that I will never be an astrologer who fearmongers. I will also never be an astrologer who sugarcoats to the point of allowing you to bypass things that are happening. And so what we're going to experience in 2025 and in 2026 is a lot of activity around creating change. And that's my way of saying stuff's going to happen. It may not be the easiest or the smoothest thing to go through, but it is going to create change. In November, and if you are someone who was excited about the results that happened in the election of November, you might want to choose a different video. But in November, one of my bright sides that I said to myself is we have these years of revolution and change coming up. At least now we get to be the ones making it rather than the ones resisting it. That is something that I use to make myself feel better a lot. I hope it is inspiring for you as well. And to everybody in this group, to everybody who's watching this video, we're going to do that together. We are not alone. We have community, and that's going to be a very big, strong point for us in any phase of life, but particularly in this one. As you're going through change, who do you want to complain to and rant about it? Your friends, right? So find your friends, know who that is. I volunteer to be a rant buddy any day. I am Mars ruled. I'm with you. Yeah, Angela gets it. So now we will dive in and start looking at the charts, beginning with the pre-ingress lunation. Both lunations that precede the Aries ingress are eclipses. So this is another reason, and they will be next year as well. With the nodes being in Pisces and Virgo, these are the signs that are where the moon will be before the sun goes into Aries, right? I'll show it to you on a chart in a second, but just knowing that that does add a sense of intensity to the years that we are coming into. So now I'm going to bring up the chart. I'm also going to give you a small tutorial for anybody who's using Luna to do this. You go into your cycles tab up here, and it's going to show you something like this. Up here, we have the solar ingresses, which we'll get to in a minute. The lunation cycles is where we're going to find our new moons, full moons, which include eclipses. So you actually want to go new moon by new moon, which means that since we're looking at a pre-ingress lunation, which will be a total lunar eclipse in Virgo on March 14th, we want to find the lunation that happens just before that. So we're going to our new moon on March 27th, and we're going to pop down here to the March 14th full moon. And this is our chart for the eclipse. I'm going to move all of our lovely faces over for a second so that I can make sure I can see my whole thing here. So you can set it for where you are. I am conveniently located very close to Washington, D.C. I'm going to set it for Washington, D.C. because that is the capital of the United States. And that is, as a member of the United States, what I am primarily focused on understanding for this. So you set the location for, you would typically do it the capital of the kingdom or the main city of the kingdom. in the context of Persian astrology's mundane astrology, we would be considered an empire because we are many small kingdoms or nations conglomerated under one umbrella. So America technically, by their standards, would probably be considered an empire. And so technically you could do this, the state capital for where you are to see more specific things. But since I am wondering about the United States in particular as a whole here, and again, if you're in another country, cast this chart for the capital of your country to get more nuance. But this will be the Aries Ingress and the prelunation for the United States, which is why we're going to set it in Washington, D.C. Cool. So with that, it's actually really important in an eclipse chart, which this is, to know where the moon is. So what we're seeing is this is an eclipse because our lovely moon up here is very close to these nodes. And in this particular one, it's the south node. So the moon is with the south node, the sun is with Saturn, and also the north node. And because we know that this the sun is not yet in Aries, it is that pre-Aries Ingress lunation. This is right before the sun moves into Aries. So a lot of this is going to look familiar when we move into the Aries Ingress chart as well. So we have this being an eclipse. Not every year is going to have an eclipse preceding the Aries Ingress. This adds, like I said before, a sense of intensity. And so when we look at this, this is one of those things where we want to kind of break down the timing of the eclipse to say, what is this eclipse predicting? What is it an omen of? And when can we expect to see this? Fun fact and bonus information, eclipses do not just pop off on the day that they happen. They actually predict a timing that can take place as much as like 6 months to 9 months later after the eclipse. That's when their significations can begin to occur. It all depends on where you find the moon in the chart. The closer the moon is to that ascending degree, the more quickly those events will unfold. We'll see this later in the document, which I'm not going to share here because it's part of the year. All of the eclipses of 2025 will be included in the student study document for the Modern School of Ancient Wisdom Patreon. If you are a member of that student study, you will have access to this document, and I will update it for you throughout the year with events that coincide with the dates that we have set up. So what we're looking at here is the moon. It's a lunar eclipse, so we're focused on the moon. She's in this top third of the chart, the middle third here. And this eclipse is visible in North America and South America and parts of Europe. It is 100% occluded eclipse. So it's a total lunar eclipse, which is the first time we've seen one of these in a couple of years as well. So the totality of the moon will be covered during this. My source is space.com, which actually draws from NASA, which is helpful. And so we see that in North America and South America and Europe, this is where the eclipse will be visible. We can assume that these places will be part of the greater effect of the eclipse. The eclipse is 100% occlusion, which means all of the population of the people that the eclipse predicts will be affected are likely to be affected. Now we'll go into who that is and when we can see that kind of unfolding. So the eclipse occurs March 14th, and in the sky for Washington, D.C., this is going to change depending on the location for you, but for Washington, D.C., in order to represent the United States, we are seeing the eclipse up here. It is not necessarily at the midheaven, but it is in that 10th house. It is in that sort of, it's not a quadrant of the chart, but it's a trifecta. It's a part of the chart that's a third of the top half where the sky that we can see is. Thank you guys for laughing with me. Okay. So it's up there, which means, according to Ptolemy's timing techniques, that the eclipse significations will begin in the second third of the year during which the eclipse occurs, which means that after the eclipse, from within a year of the eclipse, we want to look 4 to 8 months out. And I am going to check my math here because I work really hard on this. And I even have the formulas listed in this document, which you'll be able to see. So the effects will begin within 4 to 8 months of the eclipse occurring. So that puts us within the July to November period of the effects of the eclipse beginning to occur. So you can see again how we're already throwing things outward into time and saying it's not today that we're seeing the effects of this eclipse. Even though by transit the eclipse will have an effect and create some intensity, what the eclipse predicts, according to Ptolemy, will begin sometime between July and November. It's a wide window, but we have things that we'll narrow it down with in just a minute. So with that, we need to now say, okay, if it begins in the July to November timeframe, how long do its effects last? Because this is a lunar eclipse, for every hour of time that the eclipse lasts, that is going to equal 1 month. If it were a solar eclipse, it would be for every hour, it would equal 1 year. The sun goes around the zodiac in a year, the moon goes around the zodiac in a month. That's why we correlate their times to that. That's their ratio. So this is a lunar eclipse. An hour is going to equal a month. This eclipse, according to space.com, lasts for 65 minutes. That's 1 hour and 5 minutes. And if I got my math right, which I'm pretty confident in, that gives us 65 minutes coming down to, let me find my math here. It's like a month and 8 days or something like that. Um, I will find it, I promise. But yeah, it comes down to around a month and 8 days. So if we push that out, the eclipse, if it begins July through November, that means that it's going to last either until August or December, right? So it'll begin in the middle of July and November. It'll last through the pushing the middle of August and December in this same year. Solar eclipses can push themselves out multiple years. In fact, the Aries eclipse that happened in 2024 doesn't intensify until 2026. So you can see the difference here. Lunar eclipses, of course, take smaller amounts of time. And by nature, the sun in a solar eclipse will typically affect the king or the leader of a nation or a kingdom or an empire. Lunar eclipses are thought to affect more of the body of that kingdom, which would be its people. So we're seeing the lunar eclipse, as all lunar eclipses are said to do, affecting the people a little bit more than the king. Again, there are some caveats to this coming up when we get into deeper interpretation. So going into the 65 minutes being 1.08 months, when we say where this is going to then intensify in that period, since it's going to last from either July to August or November to December, it will intensify in either August or December, but in the earlier part. So we're looking at August 5th or December 5th, December 6th being intensifications. Again, it's a pretty wide window to look at, but we'll narrow it down with what we might be seeing with that in just a second. So the ruler of this eclipse is going to be the ruler of Virgo, and that means Mercury. In this case, we have Mercury down here. Mercury is direct. Mercury is having Mercury's evening set. And so it's at a very poignant part of its phase. This is a poignant moment. So again, it's really setting up for a very, I don't want to use the word poignant again, but an eclipse that really pops off. And so we want to look at Mercury to tell us when things are going to happen. The tricky thing with Mercury then is Mercury is the second fastest planet that we can see. The moon being the fastest. Yes, I'm including the moon with the planets. So Mercury retrogrades like 4 times a year, 3 or 4 times a year, and goes through phase changes more frequently than any other planet. And so we're going to look at Mercury during phase changes to see, is Mercury rising from the rays of the sun? Is that therefore intensifying the significations of the eclipse around that time? Is it setting into the beams and creating certain conflicts or subsiding some of the effects of the eclipse at that time? The list of every single Mercury phase change is going to be in that document that I share with you on the student study of the Modern School of Ancient Wisdom Patreon. In the time that the eclipse is meant to take place, I'm going just between July and December. We do have Mercury retrogrades occurring. The July 18th, Mercury will station retrograde until August 11th, and then Mercury will retrograde again November 9th through November 29th. So in those periods of time, whatever this eclipse is doing may actually pop off even more because we're seeing Mercury go through a pretty radical phase change in those times. So something to pay attention to, but also lends to the fact that if this is the tone setter for the year, it's a changeable and intense year. So that's what we're looking at. Okay, so let's look at the next steps. What is affected by this eclipse? And then we'll move into the actual Aries ingress itself to make sure that we honor the time that we have. So we already said that this eclipse is visible in North America, South America, and parts of Europe. That means that those areas may notice it the most. And so when we go down to look at what Ptolemy says is going to be affected by this eclipse, we're going to see, and I cannot believe my eyes are not finding things in my notes right now, so bear with me. I did this literally this morning. There we go. Because it is in the sign of Virgo, according to Ptolemy, things we can expect would include anywhere among the gamut of things like earthquakes. The thing that sticks out to me the most, though, is that it is said to affect winged animals, especially those used for food. Now, in the United States right now, I see a lot of the students here. Yeah, everybody's kind of doing the thing. Yeah, so winged animals, especially used for food. We know that bird flu is a concern right now. So my thing is just be very aware of your eggs between April and December this year. That may be an actual topic that we pay attention to, not even just because of the Aries Ingress, but just because those are the times during which this lunar eclipse, which seems to really call out chickens, is going off. So it also is a time that may include situations with humans and kings. Again, humans make sense because we are all people here, but the kings get drawn into this lunar eclipse. That's unique. And it also, because it is near that midheaven, is going to bring in things like rites. We're talking rites here. So rites of passage, rites of, any kind of ceremonial thing, which also brings in kings and also is said to discuss topics of middle-aged people. So not necessarily later aged people, but considering middle-aged people as something to look out for. Again, we're looking at keywords and we will see how or if they pop off. The thing that I can see most clearly now, of course, is what's already in the headlines and noticing that that might get exacerbated around that time. So that is what we're going to notice for this lunar eclipse that also, again, helps us set the tone for the Aries Ingress. Now, let's look a little bit more deeply at the Aries Ingress. I will preface this by saying the Aries Ingress is, of course, going to have a lot of data for us to go through. In this video, I'm going to go through the primary things that are the easiest to sort of look at, and we're going to keep it very simple. If you want a deep dive, again, you have that document, which will be the 2025 Aries Ingress document in the Modern School of Ancient Wisdom student study. So when we want to look in Luna for this, we're going to go back to that cycles page, and we're going to ask for the 2025 situation here. So here you'll actually be able to click between all four. In this year, we will not need to, because there is a rule that says, and I'm going to change this to be Washington, D.C. while I'm waiting here. There is a rule that actually tells you to look at the rising sign of a chart to decide how many of the seasonal charts you will need to understand that year. By this chart, because we have a fixed sign, which is Aquarius, by this chart, we're actually seeing what should have been a pretty stable year. Stable being that there is one major topic that the year focuses on. So while the outer planets are moving and the world is going through a lot, the world at large is going through a lot of change. Society is going through a lot of change. What the United States is focused on may be a topic that is consistent throughout the entire year. If this were different, if we had a cardinal sign, which would be like Aries, Cancer, Capricorn, and Libra, we would be looking at every single one of the seasonal changes to see, because every quarter of the year, the topic would change. And so we'd be in even more of a changeable year, but at least now we have a little bit of stability, if we want to call it that. So we have Aquarius rising. And when we look for the ruler of the chart, there's a lot of criteria that we go through here. It is not necessarily the ruler of Aquarius that gets to be the ruler of the year. Last year in 2024, it happened that there was a Scorpio rising chart, which Mars was in fact the lord of. But in this case, through going through a lot of Ptolemy and Abu Mashar and Masha Allah's criteria, I have determined with my mentor and a lot of peer review that the moon is actually the ruler of the year. This is something that gives me more hope than you might anticipate, because the moon represents the people. And the moon, of course, is one of the feminine representations of the astrology that we have available to us. Of the astrology that we would look at for this, which would be the visible planets from the sun out to Saturn, we only have two feminine planets, and those are the moon and Venus. So for the moon to be in charge, the moon representing, again, the body of the nation, the people have a lot more sway this year. Last year, the moon was also in the midheaven, and the people made choices that were really effective. Whether you agreed with them or not, the people got to use their voice and they were in the position of power. Here again, we see a little bit off of the same position of power where the midheaven is in Scorpio, the moon is in Sagittarius. Sagittarius is a sign that really does like freedom and likes to bring things into a space where we can experience things, where we can learn our own lessons, where we can benefit from the experiences we have. Now, the ruler of Sagittarius, the ruler of the moon, is opposite the moon down here in the fifth house with Jupiter technically in detriment, but at least direct in Gemini. So there may be some situations when we're looking at the ruler of the year representing the people in multiple ways, saying to us that the people have some issues that they're working through this year. So that is something that we want to keep in mind, that it's not necessarily a year of abundance. It's a year of taking care of ourselves. And so just know that if you feel that this year, you're validated, right? You are part of a society, you are part of a time in history where we are in one of those years of change and of making sure we have what we need. So do prioritize taking care of yourself and taking care of the people around you that you are able to. So when we go into that, we're going to see that the ruler of the chart is Saturn, but the ruler of the year is the moon. Saturn does not slouch, though. If we look at Saturn being the ruler of the chart, we still know that there's a lot of information that Saturn wants to tell us. And in Masha Allah's considerations for the year, Masha Allah actually points out one of the things that we see in this, which is Saturn's proximity to that north node. Masha Allah actually says that if Saturn is with the north node in the Aries Ingress, it is as though there is an eclipse in the Aries Ingress chart. So we had a pre-lunation that was an eclipse, and now we have Saturn with the north node bringing that same kind of intensity. Again, an intense year of change that we can expect from this. Does change mean catastrophe? Not always. So for some of us, it's going to feel like a catastrophe. For some of us, it's going to maybe even have the best year ever. Your personal timing operates within this larger cycle. So this is not gloom and doom. It is just letting you know that the society and the environments that we are working within this year are not giving as much abundance as we could. We are not in the Garden of Eden. We are tilling the soil. And that is okay. There are years for that. And this is one of them. So again, emphasis on taking care of yourself, taking care of the people around you, make sure you have what you need, and then help others. That's a good rule of thumb for all times, and especially right now. So when we go through things, we already talked about the Lord of the luminary of the moon, because the moon is the ruler of the year. And of course, the sun is always going to be in Aries at 0 degrees in the Aries Ingress chart, which means we're always going to look at Mars. And in this case, it's important to look at Mars as well, because Mars is the ruler of the 10th house. The 10th house tells us the condition of the king. So when we are looking at the king or the ruler of the year, we're looking at the Lord of the 10th house as well as the sun. The sun's always going to be exalted, but isn't a king exalted because they are given all the resources and power? Then we look at Mars for the nuance. In this situation, we find Mars in the 6th house in the sign of his fall in Cancer. Fortunately, Mars is direct where Mars was retrograde before. And I say fortunately, but what we're looking at here is, again, the king not necessarily doing as well as the king could do, not really feeling as exalted as the king would like to feel. The fall of a planet is the opposite of the sign of their exaltation. Exaltation is when they are lifted up and celebrated. Fall is when they lose reputation. So that's what we're looking at here. And this is happening as well in the 6th house, which does govern things like illnesses and health topics. Last year, the sun was in the 6th house, and we also had a lot of indications of health topics. And of course, during the United States political campaign, age was a big topic. Health and vitality were a big topic. This year, we do not have an election to think about. We have one person that we are thinking about, and their topic is also in that sign that is showing health and maybe not in the best condition of it. Now, it should also be noted that Mars as a planet rejoices in the 6th house, which amplifies Mars's ability to be Marsy. And so, though maybe not exalted or anything like that, the ability to do what Mars wants to do, which is very actionable or conflicting or fiery kind of action, is still going to be a primary motivator for the person represented by this, which of course is the leader in the United States right now. I don't really feel like saying his name, but you know who I'm talking about. So we're thinking about that. And just knowing those conditions. There are other things in the chart that do talk about foreign travel and situations with health that may be included with this. Another thing we want to think about is when you're looking at timing, you actually will use a technique called annual perfections, but we're going to use monthly perfections because we're only working within the time frame of a year. And so with monthly perfections, you would count from the Aries Ingress, which is on the 20th of March, and give the first house 1 month. And when you come to a malefic like Saturn or Mars, that month may have more of those significations of those planets. So in this situation, coming back to Saturn, Saturn is in the second house in Pisces with that North Node. The second house in a natal chart represents finances or material possessions and material wealth, or as Demetra George likes to say, it's that which we use to support our lifestyle. In a mundane chart, if we zoom that out to affect an entire society, this is the finances of the nation. So this would be things like the funds that our nation has. And so we have Saturn there showing restriction, and it is a chart that occurs at nighttime. So Saturn is a little bit more challenging than usual, being the out of sect malefic. So we see a lot of the challenges this year coming in that financial area of experience. So we want to keep our eye on that, especially with Saturn being with the node, showing that there is an amplification to this. So we already know things around like inflation or scarcity of resources is something that we're experiencing now. So again, not worried about getting panicked about this. We already are seeing this kind of thing coming up. Just know it's something that you're going to want to prepare to be able to work with throughout the year. So then we move on to, again, in a couple months after that. So this would be March 20th through April 20th is that first month. Then April 20th through May 20th pops off on the second. So we might notice those second house topics of this chart after April 20th and until May 20th really showing up. Now, this might also be the time where that lunation comes into play. So thinking about that as well, we have multiple timings popping off at the same time, which creates a more active month, not even by transit, right? We're not even talking about the planets as they are in the sky of the moment. We're talking about this chart unfolding what it promises, and the chart of the eclipse unfolding what it promises, just like our own natal charts unfold what they promise over the course of our own lives. This is timing techniques, and it is something that would have come in the order of operations before we consider transits. Now, you'll notice before when we talked about the lunations, transits can really help us to identify even more magnification to a topic, but they are the final and last consideration. Some would even say the least consideration of timing techniques. We look at these things first in traditional astrology, and this is why. So if you're ever experiencing something where you're like, I don't know why this is happening, none of the transits explain it, it may be a part of the timing, either for the world at the time, for your country at the time, or for you at the time. All right, so we're going to jump down here and we're going to talk about, let's see, what other things seem really important? Okay, so we talked about the place of the Lord of the Year. We talked about the king. Now, in traditional astrology, the people are called the rustics. That's your everyday person, your everybody, right? And so again, for this, we look at the moon. The moon is actually in a decent position of the chart. She is in the 11th house of good diamond, good spirit. There is good fortune in the chart. This is above that, right? This is like divine intervention assistance. The moon is in Sagittarius, and when we single her out, we can see that she is trine Venus and Mercury, who are both retrograde at this point, which tells us some things that we'll get to next. And she also has this opposition with Jupiter. Jupiter is always supportive. Being the greater benefic, Jupiter will always give support, even if we have what is typically considered a challenging aspect. So though Jupiter is in detriment, we still have Jupiter connecting to the moon and offering some support with that. The moon is actually applying to Jupiter next, which is something to note that the future of this, that the moon is moving towards, is Jupiterian topics. So we want to keep that in mind. Now, let's also talk about the two retrograde planets in the chart because they are significant. Retrograde planets here will include, and fortunately, the only ones we need to worry about or to think about are Venus and Mercury. Venus represents topics of feminine presenting people. Mercury will represent topics of youth, of children, but also in more modern astrology, we have incorporated these to be the planets that seem to speak most to gender topics. Mercury changes and is traditionally known for multicolors like a rainbow. Venus, of course, emphasizes the sexuality of a person in some ways, and of course their way that they like to present themselves, the way that they feel most embodied. So modern astrologers will frequently go to Venus for these topics of gender and sexuality. Both of them are retrograde, which means this may be a year for setbacks in those topics. So again, I just want to emphasize, make sure you're taking care of yourself, make sure you have your community, make sure you're feeling safe, and that everything that you need to support yourself is set up for you. It is not necessarily saying that we're going to have like chaotic issues to the nth degree, but it's not the best year for those topics either. So I want to be real with you and just let you know that I would not fearmonger, but I would also make sure that you feel prepared and secure. With this, it is in the third house of community, of news, and this is a big thing. So the third house talks about communications, commerce, connections, and this is where we find technology and news as well. So the big setbacks that we might find here will come in the form of paperwork and what is being said about these communities. If this were in the sixth house, I would have more concerns about illnesses for these communities. If it were in the first house, I would have more concerns about their bodily safety. If it were in the 10th house, I would have more concerns about them being put out in the open in a way that may not be great. In this case, what we are seeing and I honestly, if it were in the eighth or the ninth house, I'd have more concerns about law and legality. It's in the third house. So what we see as probably the most intense situation for these communities is going to be third house topics of news, of what is said about these people, and of more local situations going on around that. So while I don't necessarily think the astrology says laws will be rewritten in this case, but local situations, local legislations, because we are looking at for the entire United States and bringing that down, local situations may be something you want to keep an eye on. So make sure you find yourself a community physically and virtually that you feel safe in. And that should really help with the situation for this year. Again, so like not the worst thing that I could see in the chart, but it's not my favorite thing either. I'll be perfectly honest. So just make sure that your local legislation, your local community feels like it is supportive for you. And if it's not, and you have the ability, find ways to feel more secure with whatever you can. And if you're looking for community again, reach out to me in a way. I will help you however I can, I promise you, because I'm one of you and I care. Cool. And so with that, when we look at the assets of the king, that is also something that belongs to the people. So I want to bring this up. This feels empowering and I'm being pulled to it. So I'm going to go to it. The assets of the king are represented by the second house from the king, right? So if the king is the 10th house, this is acting as the king's first house, much like we would have in a natal chart where we have our first house. Then the second house becomes our assets, our finances. The second house here is the moon, right? So again, the assets of the king only go as far as the people allow. And I really want to make sure that we make sure that we remember the people are the Lord of the year this year. So in everything you're doing, in everything that you're talking about, in everything you're working on, make sure you realize that you're the one in power. And even if there are things that happen that make you feel small, you are the ruler of this year. You and the people around you, the people of this country, rule this year. Now, we have time to look forward to things that are undone in what feels like a very quick time frame, may take longer to redo or to firm up again, but it is a worthwhile endeavor for us. And I think that that's going to be important as well. Okay, just going to go through some more of my stuff this year. And I think that's everything I wanted to bring up on this video. There will be more details going on in the document that you will have access to, but for the purposes of this video, I hope this is helpful. I hope it feels empowering. I hope it feels like it contributes to your resources so that you know what steps you want to take to, again, feel great, to feel safe, to feel supported, to feel included where you need to feel included, and to make sure you know that you are within this society, but your personal timing may also have really good things coming ahead. If you're interested in looking into that and you want some support with it, reach out to me and I will be happy to schedule a consultation with you where we can look at it for you in particular so that you can feel secure and we can even strategize how you can make the most out of this year for yourself and your own personal timing. With that, I want to thank you very much for watching this video and I hope you have a great year.